infringement notices in the last few years, but now plans to introduce this fantastic new regime and collect $10,000 a year.
Well, the reason why you can't issue infringement notices is because local government's hands are tied. You can make bylaws till the cows come home. If the first thing you have to do is prove who the person is who's dropped the litter, and you say, "Excuse me, madam, I saw you throw a cigarette butt out of your car window. What's your name so I can write you a ticket?" And she says, "Bugger off, noddy." As a council officer, you've got no power to go back. A police officer can require you to provide your name and address. Council officer can't. There's no power under the law.
Right.
It's an absolute blooming nonsense. It's easy enough if you can find a bag of rubbish that's got somebody's address written on an envelope that says rubbish is property of Sue Wells, blah, 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 and you can actually make the connection that way. But until local councils are properly empowered to enforce their bylaws, I roll my eyes in despair. Can you see me doing that?
I can see you. I can see you rolling. But even if there were, what chance does this have also of being enforced when people doing the littering are tough and big and surly and like boy racers who apparently leave an awful lot of waste after their
well, you've got to actually observe who's doing it. You've got to observe someone doing it and get proof of identity and then write them a ticket.
And how do you do that if they're drunk?
Well, there you
staggering down the street.
Well, and how do you do it if they refuse to give you their ID?
Yeah,
think it through. It's just not smart.
It's a bit like those... The
whole system is stupid.
Road-mounted speed cameras who can't take demerit points off someone who's been caught by one of them because they can't actually prove that that was the person driving the car.
Now, let's just not go too far, Jeremy. There are sometimes good things that come out of silliness.
The forever raging argument is whether by providing more bins you encourage more litter. And may I report on the city of Edmonton in Canada, its inhabitants, I'm sure you'll vouch for this, Jeremy, people just like us, when ashtrays were dotted along main thoroughfares, littering with cigarette butts, which will now see a $100 fine in Christchurch, littering by cigarette butts declined by 87%.
It does not surprise me at all. I am, for my sins, still a smoker, and it drives me nuts when you're outside a bar or a cafe, you're forced to stand outside in the street, which I have no problem with doing, but then you go to find somewhere to put out your cigarette and there's nowhere to put it. And, I do not like putting my cigarette butts out in the street, but I'm not going to stub them out on my hand. Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. And whether that works, I think the correlation with litter bins is probably very similar. I think most people don't want to litter, and would, but people will take the easy option. It's people are inherently lazy.
Yeah.
If you have to walk 150 metres to put your McDonald's bag in a bin, or you could just tuck it under a park bench somewhere, sadly, most people will choose the latter.
Oh, no, they wouldn't. Would you do that? I would never do that. Never in a million years.
Yeah, I'm not.
I don't think it's most people. I think most people are fairly responsible. There's just a bunch of ratbags who... God, I'm getting old and grumpy, aren't I? There are a bunch of ratbags. Yeah, no, who... It would be lovely if you could actually catch them in the act and say, "Excuse me, you dropped something."
Yeah.
You don't need $100 fine for that. You just need to be somewhere in a bad mood at the right time, observe someone and meddle.
Auckland
I'm in the mood for that right now. You know that?
Well,
I feel like going out and policing something.
While you're in that mood, can you just give us a quick opinion? Auckland Council's offering an amnesty now to dog owners to get their beasts registered, microchipped and desexed. This will last to the middle of the year, and it's available to menacing dogs, particularly the bull terriers and crosses and such.
There's 4 breeds.
Yeah.
Of which pit bulls are one.
And the council will also waive the registration fee. And if you haven't already registered your dog, there's an amnesty for that. Is this a good idea? It's going to cost quite a bit of money with all the leaflets and pamphlets, targeting owners who have already shown they aren't as responsible, presumably, as other dog owners.
I think they've got to do that if they're going to then crack down, and they need to crack down, because there should be no pit bulls in New Zealand by now. The law changes that were brought through in the Dog Control Amendment Act of 2000 and something should have resulted in that breed dying out by now. Hasn't
So this is an opening salvo in a longer game?
Needs to be a much longer game.
All right. Sue Wells, thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Hey, glad to hear your car's fixed.
It's great. It goes now. It goes. It really goes.
Has been on the panel with Jeremy Elwood. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jim.
And good luck for your tour if we don't talk to you before that.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. And Checkpoint with John Campbell follows.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, flooding. As stretched and ageing stormwater systems struggle to cope, who pays for the upgrades? And if the answer's no one, what will insurance companies do? Tenants, landlords and insurance, is there a resolution in the dispute there over where the buck and the cost stops? Freedom campers are banned from Christchurch, out. Auckland in the battle against unregistered and menacing dogs. Chernobyl, 3 decades on. The Queen, 90 years on. All of that and more in the next 90 minutes. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Papakura MP and Cabinet Minister Judith Collins says councils around the country should be following the lead of Auckland and cracking down on unregistered dogs. The Auckland Council today announced an amnesty for owners of unregistered dogs that are classified as menacing, allowing them to register the dogs for free until June the 30th. After that, council officers will launch a region-wide blitz, impounding any remaining unregistered dogs and fining their owners. Judith Collins, whose electorate has a high number of dog attacks, says the Dog Control Act already gives councils the abilities to deal with menacing dogs.
Auckland can do all it can, but actually nationwide, other districts or other councils need to come to the party, and that's, if they don't, that's where government tends to step in.
Judith Collins, who's also the Police Minister, says the government will consider the Auckland Council's suggestions, which include requiring owners of menacing dogs to be certified. The insurance company at the centre of a dispute over whether landlords and their insurers or tenants are liable for accidental damage says it's now a matter for Parliament to sort out. The Court of Appeal has ruled against AMI Insurance after it tried to force the tenants Kenji and Tieko Osaki to pay a $216,000 repair bill when a house it insured burnt down. However, a district court, the High Court and now the Court of Appeal has ruled the Osakis are not liable. AMI, now under the ownership of AIG Insurance, says it must accept the court's decision but finds it difficult to reconcile considering the Tenancies Act says tenants can be found liable. It says it's now a matter for Parliament to address and it's still considering the significance for the company and its customers of the appeal court ruling. The judge who sentenced a woman to home detention for stabbing her partner to death says it's the right punishment in the circumstances. Amanda Tai Tapanui, who's 29, had originally pleaded not guilty to murdering Mura Dean Tangalatauli in March last year, but later admitted the lesser charge of manslaughter. In the Wellington High Court today, the Justice Clifford said he had not found another case in which a person who had stabbed someone to death was given home detention, but it was appropriate in this case.
Your conviction for manslaughter, the sentence of home detention, and your own recognition that you must live with the consequences of your action for the rest of your life are for you, in my assessment, sufficient in terms of accountability, promoting responsibility, denouncing your offending, and providing for the deterrence of others.
Justice Clifford says he was also taking into account Tai Tapanui's post-traumatic stress disorder, her guilty plea, and the fact she has 5 children in her care. Government agency call centres are being targeted by international scammers who want to get money out of staff. The Internal Affairs Department says operators are on guard after numerous calls from cyber criminals wanting information about workers. A spokesperson, Raj Krishnan, says staff are getting aggressive calls from overseas scammers seeking job titles and email addresses. He says the callers target organisations with malicious emails to force a financial transaction or gain unlawful access to private information for online scams. Mr Krishnan says the department is working to have the calls automatically dropped, but staff should always be on high alert. The Australian Prime Minister has admitted for the first time his government has the ability to launch cyber attacks. Malcolm Turnbull says use of the offensive cyber capability is subject to stringent legal oversight. His comments came as he confirmed a cyber intrusion from overseas on the Bureau of Meteorology that infected its entire computer network. From Sydney's The BBC's Phil Mercer reports.
Last year, China was suspected of infiltrating Australia's Bureau of Meteorology that infected its entire computer network. The government in Canberra won't comment on the security breach, but it is responding to the ever-present threat of cybercrime. Malcolm Turnbull says Australia is to boost its online defences. There'll be closer collaboration between the government and businesses, and a special ambassador will be appointed.
Phil Mercer in Sydney. A jury is now deciding if 2 teenagers murdered a man in an Auckland motel so they could rob him, or if they acted in self-defence. Leonard Natras-Bergquist and Bowen Wallace-Loretz have been on trial in the High Court in Auckland. They both deny murdering Ihia Gilman Harris, who was 54, in the Epsom motel just after Christmas in 2014. The teenagers were both 17 at the time. The prosecution said they made good on a plan to beat and rob a man who was expecting only consensual sexual activity. But defence says Mr Wallace-Loretz was simply protecting his best mate from a sexual assault. To sport, and the New Zealand World Golf #1 Lydia Ko is chasing a 3rd straight swinging skirts title when she tees off in the latest LPGA Tour event in San Francisco overnight. She won't, however, be chasing another tattoo. The swinging skirts title was her first LPGA Tour win as a professional, and she has the date tattooed on her wrist. The world #1 is overwhelming favourite to become just the 11th player in LPGA history to win 3 consecutive titles at the same event. Though she should win, she's unlikely to mark the milestone with ink.
Probably not, because my mom probably won't let me. To me, I always wanted to get, a date, one of my first wins, and for this one being my first one as a tour member, I thought it was really memorable. And no, I'm not sure if I'm gonna get another date tattoo.
Lydia Ko. New Zealand Rugby says the Australian Union hasn't raised with it the possibility of playing a Bledisloe Cup test in London or New York. From 2020, Australia is considering staging a cup test at Twickenham and other venues in Australia and around the world during a rebuild of Sydney's ANZ Stadium. The Cleveland Cavaliers have taken a 2-0 lead in the best-of-7 NBA Western Conference playoff with a 107-90 win in Game 2 over the Detroit Pistons. That's the news.
Water rights.
As a country, we own the water, and we've got a right, like coal and anything else we're exporting or extracting and exporting, to put a royalty on it.
Māori Council ructions.
No, I won't be walking away because a majority of the Māori Council have asked me to chair the council, so that's my duty to do that.
Birthday fun for the Queen.
We do have a corgi actually, and we have some pigeons to release. It's going to be a bit of a flutter and a bit of a yap.
Ruling the morning airwaves, Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espin, a morning report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, scientists say the cost of pitching for research dollars could end up being more than the funding they're chasing. And after 10, James Portnoy, the former video game addict turned designer who's all about making gaming more ethical. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after morning report on RNZ National.
The Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow: Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Mostly sunny, however a few showers, especially in Coromandel and Northland. Gisborne, a few showers becoming confined to the ranges tomorrow and sunny spells increasing. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa fine from Waikato to Wellington, including the central high country. Also Buller, Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds, mostly sunny. However, a few showers tomorrow, mainly from Taranaki southwards. The remainder of Marlborough, also Canterbury, sunny weather. Otago and Southland fine with high cloud. Rain developing about the south coast tonight. Patchy falls elsewhere tomorrow evening. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine. Rain developing in Fiordland this evening. Rain becoming persistent in Fiordland tomorrow morning and spreading to southern Westland later, with a few showers elsewhere. Rain becoming heavy in Fiordland tomorrow evening. And the Chatham Islands, mostly sunny. It is 5:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. See you at 5:30. We begin tonight with flooding and a warning from the Insurance Council. Ageing stormwater infrastructure and the increasing frequency of severe storms means insurance premiums will not only rise, some low-lying and flood-prone areas may have flooding completely excluded from their insurance policies. The Insurance Council coming up, but this arises out of a report into flooding in South Dunedin last June. $28 million worth of damage was done as people were forced out of their homes, in some cases for months. The report found that from a total of 1,000 mud tanks effectively overflow in storage tanks in the city's stormwater system, 75% were non-compliant with specifications. I quote, 26% were totally blocked. The rains were torrential. It's been described as a one-in-a-century storm, but as one-in-a-century storms become more often, The report suggests South Dunedin's dated and inadequate infrastructure contributed to the effects of that rainfall. Now, Checkpoint has just been told by Fulton Hogan, the contractor charged with running the system, that it wrote to the Dunedin City Council in February 2015, 4 months before the floods, to express its concern about the condition of the drainage infrastructure. South Dunedin MP Claire Curran, who has dealt with South Dunedin residents forced to pay rates for months despite not being able to live in their flood-damaged homes, says the report is damning.
Well, it tells us what I think that most of the people in South Dunedin already knew, and that was that there was a massive failure of infrastructure the night of the 3rd of June last year, whether it was mud tanks, whether it was pumping stations, the council-owned infrastructure that wasn't working properly, hadn't been cleaned out, and as a result, hundreds and hundreds of people's homes, or perhaps thousands of people and hundreds of homes were flooded, and people have been distressed and displaced ever since, and nobody has taken responsibility.
It's very confusing to determine this from the report, and it's very difficult to determine this from the report, but do you believe that if the system had been working better, the flooding would not have been as bad?
Absolutely. There may have been some flooding. Of course there may have been some flooding. It was torrential rain. It was a very heavy rainpour. But the fact is that not only did all of those homes flood and streets and wherever, but the council took its eye off the ball, absolutely took its eye off the ball, and it's 10.5 months since then, and we're only now getting a report saying that 75% of the mud tanks were not properly maintained. Why has it taken so long, and why is nobody taking responsibility for it? Why are they still ducking from that responsibility, John?
And what's the answer to that question? Why do you believe that's the case?
Well, over the last 10 months, we've heard that anybody who raised questions about the infrastructure was ignorant or wrong. And now we're seeing blaming bad advice from staff, blaming the contractor. We've had climate change being blamed for the floods. In my book, John, good governance, whether it's central government or local government or whatever, means that if you're employed to take responsibility at the top, when something goes wrong, you take responsibility for it. And I don't think we've seen that happening.
South Dunedin MP Claire Curran. Now, the Dunedin Mayor Dave Cowell told the Otago Daily Times he was, quote, outraged at the dual failure from Fulton Hogan and council staff. We've just heard from Fulton Hogan, more on that coming up. Mr Cull is in the Chatham Islands today. We've really tried hard to get hold of him, but he was unavailable for an interview with Checkpoint. This afternoon I spoke to the author of the report, Ruth Stokes. Now, Ms Stokes is also the Dunedin City Council's General Manager for Infrastructure and Networks. I asked her to explain her report.
I believe that the report says that there are a number of challenges with South Dunedin and with managing significant hazards and events. And amongst all that, it says that actually we have not done our job particularly well in a matter of a small piece of infrastructure, which has come to light when we've been investigating our response and management of the event.
Do you believe if you had done your job better, the flood wouldn't have been as bad?
No, John, I'm pretty good at my job, but I can't have stopped all that rain.
Although you're not in the business of preventing rain, you're in the business of getting the water away once it falls, aren't you?
We are in the business of getting away some of the water. That's what the stormwater system does, and there has been a lot of change in that area since the stormwater system was built. Obviously, we've got increasing hard surfaces. We've got a lot more water that our system has to cope with that it wasn't designed for. And of course, at the time, we also had groundwater levels that were elevated during and post the event, which meant that effectively, actually, the system was meant to cope with all the water, and of course, it just couldn't.
Okay, so if we drill down into this, what you're implicitly saying there is that your system is outdated, that it simply wasn't able to cope with the rainfall and with the new demands of South Dunedin, 40, 50 years after it was put in?
Now, what I'm saying, John, is that when you've got rainfall that's, you haven't had rainfall like that for nearly 100 years, no system in New Zealand would be able to cope.
No. So when you say there was an infrastructure failure, what do you mean?
We didn't manage the mud tank components of the stormwater system. It's a very small part of the system, and given the amount of rain, it wouldn't have mattered if all those mud tanks.
How do you know that?
The system was beyond its capacity for 17 hours. The system is not designed to take 1 in 100-year events.
Okay, so why is your mayor so cross? He's quoted in the ODT this morning as saying he's outraged at the dual failure from Fulton Hogan and the council staff. He's not talking about the weather, he's talking about the infrastructure.
He's talking about a component of the infrastructure and how we've managed it, John. And yes, we've acknowledged that we failed in that area, and we are making changes.
Ruth, I'm not sure what that acknowledgement means though, because you've spent the beginning of the interview telling me it wouldn't have made any difference.
Not in a flood event, no, it wouldn't have made any difference. But obviously, we don't get flood events like that every day, thankfully, and we need to be making sure that our systems, that our infrastructure meets the needs of our community on a day-to-day basis.
So the mayor is angry about what? Sorry, I'm really confused, because if the mayor is angry and you're apologising and saying the infrastructure was not up to scratch, implicit, in fact explicit in that is that the flood wouldn't have been as bad if the infrastructure was working. But you're telling me it made no difference to the flood.
Yes, I'm telling you that the mud tanks wouldn't have made a difference to the flood, that the flood was caused by the volumes of rain. The mayor is not happy with us because we have not ensured that we have managed the infrastructure as required under our contract, and understandably.
If I go to your report, point 54, if the mud tanks were compromised to the extent currently identified, they may have contributed to the time taken for the floodwaters on or above road level to disappear. You wrote that, right?
Yes, I did.
So are you telling me that's not the case?
No, I'm not telling you that's not the case. What you're saying
is the infrastructure didn't get the surface water away quickly enough, but that's not material to the flooding.
That infrastructure couldn't have got any water away for over 17 hours. So what we're saying is there are so many factors at play in South Dunedin. We had rain on the flat, we had rain on the hills. South Dunedin got a double whammy. It was getting water from a lot of areas. We had people driving through those floodwaters. There were so many factors at play that we just can't say what, if anything, could be attributed to the mud tanks.
Point 52 of your report, from a total 1,046 mud tanks checked and cleaned by CityCare by 20 April, 75% were non-compliant with the contract specifications. Of these, 26% were totally blocked, that's a quarter, 36% partially blocked, that's a third, and over 230 tonnes of debris had been removed. Is that anywhere near good enough?
No, it's not good enough, John.
That's Ruth Stokes, who is the Dunedin City Council's General Manager for Infrastructure and Networks. We would love your feedback, particularly if you were affected by those floods. If you're in South Dunedin, what do you think of the infrastructure beneath you, basically? Is it adequate? Now, after we interviewed Ms Stokes, we received a statement from Fulton Hogan. It says the company has delivered maintenance services for the councils for 2 years and 9 months. It says over that time, the council has supervised Fulton Hogan's performance, and the company has passed numerous performance audits. It says due to the age and historic nature of the stormwater network, including those mud tanks we've been talking about, effective maintenance is a challenge. This is Fulton Hogan. Fulton Hogan says it wrote to the council to express its concern about the condition of the drainage infrastructure, including those mud tanks, in February 2015. So Fulton Hogan is telling us it wrote to the council in February. The floods, of course, were 4 months later. Dunedin cost insurers $28 million. That's a relatively small sum, and it's entirely dwarfed by earthquake payouts in Christchurch, for example. But with the frequency of flooding claims rising, insurers have paid out in Dunedin, Whanganui, Wellington and the West Coast in the past 12 months, and highly likely to rise further. Insurers are saying money that's not spent on updating infrastructure will end up on insurance premiums. Tim Grafton is the CEO of the New Zealand Insurance Council.
Well, John, it's going to be a growing problem over the years. Climate change, as we know, we've seen a lot of evidence that talks about sea level rise. When you combine that with heavy rainfall and our ageing infrastructure of stormwater drains and the like, what that spells out is that we've got a growing problem around the country, particularly where there's housing in low-lying areas. So if you look at South Dunedin, that was basically a swamp area in the 19th century. Decisions were made to build on it. And there was a storm last year, which was, I think, the heaviest rainstorm, or the second heaviest in 100 years. And so there was aging infrastructure, 50 to 60-year-old stormwater pipes, just incapable of coping with that volume.
And is it your concern that this is going to become increasingly common?
Yes, that's right, particularly in parts of New Zealand where we have ageing stormwater infrastructure built before climate change was ever factored in, increasing population and development in those areas over that time, hard surfaces, which means that water doesn't soak into the ground and therefore contributes to flooding more, and then sea level rise, which starts to bring seawater back inland and therefore blocking up stormwater drains at the same time as you might get a high tide and a storm event. So that combination can be extremely damaging and cause all sorts of social and economic disruption for people.
Have you been sounding the alarm on this? Are you talking to people about this? Are you saying it's time for an increased spend? What are you saying?
Yes, we have. We produced a 15-point plan about 18 months ago. We've been talking to councils about natural hazard risks, and this is one area that we have been banging on and will continue to do.
And are you being taken seriously? I mean, I know that there's an element of self-interest here because you want to protect the insurers you represent from having to do massive payouts. But at a infrastructure level, are you being taken seriously enough, do you think?
Look, there's no pretending that this is isn't a very difficult problem, because we're talking about spending to save dollars in the future, and always there are more immediate priorities for councils to look at. And there are councils around the country with very small population rating bases that simply are incredibly challenged to meet some of the infrastructural investment that's going to be required. In terms of insurer self-interest, yes, to an extent, but also if you want to keep insurance available and accessible to people to transfer that risk, then you've got to reduce the risk, and that means investing in adaptation measures such as building the capacity of modern stormwater drain systems.
Because what you're saying is if that doesn't happen, insurance premiums are going to go up.
Well, if risk goes up, then insurance will respond typically either by increasing premium or increasing the excess. That's the amount that the insured pays before the insurance kicks in.
And if you look at the low-lying levels, which are prone to flooding and which are prone to the seawater blocking the drains, coupled with ageing infrastructure, is there going to be a situation where you will say flooding is out of your insurance policy, we won't cover it? Will you eventually be saying that?
Look, I can't say that because that's an individual decision for each insurer to make. But if we do nothing over the coming years and sea level rise brings about more and more frequent flooding, then that is a possibility that some insurers could look at.
Tim Grafton from the Insurance Council of New Zealand. 5:24 on Checkpoint. Coming up on the program, the Auckland Council offers an amnesty to owners of unregistered dogs classified as menacing. They'll register the dog for free for the next 10 weeks, and for $25 they'll throw in desexing, microchipping and a muzzle. But if you don't do it, and a court ruling may force landlords to become way more vigilant about who they rent their homes to or their insurance policies. And we're in Te Aroha as the town celebrates the Queen's 90th birthday, and perhaps fire alarms. Actually, I'm just going back to the landlords and their tenants. You can text us on 2101 if you have feedback. We'd love your feedback on insurance issues, Dunedin, and of course dogs, an issue that does really get you going. You can tweet us, Checkpoint at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. By the way, don't forget you can watch us live streaming on the RNZ website, and we're on Freeview Channel 50. Just straightened my jacket as I said that. The Auckland Council has the owners of unregistered menacing dogs in its sights after a spate of savage attacks. It's offering an amnesty to owners of unregistered dogs classified as menacing. They'll register the dog for free until the 30th of June, and for $25 they'll throw in desexing, microchipping and a muzzle. But as Kate Newton reports, once the amnesty ends, the council is going to launch a citywide blitz on any remaining unregistered menacing dogs.
Auckland Council's head of animal management, Jeff Keeber, says his staff are dealing with dog attacks, like the one that left a 7-year-old nursing serious injuries in Takanini, all too often.
It breaks their heart to see the injuries that we've seen in the media over the last 4 weeks. Like the St John's guys that are out there, they see these injuries and they see the emotions that the families go through. It's becoming too frequent, and we're doing this to keep our children safe. As a father of 2 young kids, I cannot begin to think how the parents of these young children feel.
Mr. Keeber's hoping the amnesty might help address that by encouraging dog owners to do the right thing.
The majority of offences that we detect, my officers detect, of an aggressive nature, yes, are caused by unregistered dogs. So there is an implicit relationship between people registering their dogs and being good dog owners.
Once the amnesty's over, Mr. Keeber says his staff will be out in force, tracking down any menacing dogs that are still unregistered, seizing them instantly and finding their owners. The dogs covered by the amnesty are 4 specific breeds: the Brazilian Fila, Dogo Argentino, Japanese Tosa and Perro de Preso Canario, along with Pit Bull Terrier type dogs and any dog that's deemed menacing because of its past behaviour. The Police Minister, Judith Collins, whose Papakura electorate has a high number of dog attacks, agrees with Mr. Keeber that the problem often lies with the behaviour of the humans involved, not the dogs.
Frankly, if I look at some of the people who have these menacing dogs, they also unfortunately don't look after their children, they don't look after themselves, they don't look after anything, and actually why would we really seriously expect them to suddenly become responsible dog owners?
Auckland Council's also recommended the government change the Dog Control Act to require all menacing dogs to be desexed unless they have breeding papers, and for all menacing dog owners to be certified. Mrs. Collins says the government will consider those suggestions, but the Act already gives councils the ability to do things like desex menacing dogs.
Auckland can do all it can, but actually nationwide other districts or other councils need to come to the party, and that's, if they don't, that's where government tends to step in.
The president of the American Pit Bull Terrier Association, Karen Batchelor, says the amnesty is actually not a bad idea, but only if it extends to all dogs, not just certain breeds that are classified as menacing.
Well, if they're going to have an amnesty for all unregistered dog owners across the board, then why not? We were disappointed to see the breed-specific language in there, if they're going to be, from the look of things, targeting pit bulls, which is a bit sad.
Auckland councillor Callum Penrose, who announced the changes, wasn't too interested in extending the amnesty though.
It's a particular breed that I'm focused on that are causing harm in our community, and we need to deal with that.
The council says it'll be door-knocking and distributing information in the coming weeks about how people can take up the amnesty offer. For Checkpoint, Kate Newton.
Queen Elizabeth celebrated her 90th birthday today. In fact, the entire royal family turned out in the small Waikato town of Te Aroha to mark the birthday of the world's oldest living monarch. Well, at least their lookalikes did. Delightful town, Te Aroha. This is a bit of a tradition there. Our reporter Joe O'Brien joined the locals warmly welcoming Her Majesty and family as they strolled down the main street.
Queen Elizabeth was in fine form, although slightly overwhelmed by the warm reception from Te Aroha locals.
Beautiful people. It was so worth coming to these shores to celebrate my birthday. New Zealand, of course, is the first country in the world to see the new day. So I intend to make my birthday a long day, start partying early.
Ever walking in his mother's shadow, the next in line to the throne, Prince Charles, had this to say about the Queen's latest milestone.
Well, she just won't pop her clogs, will she? I thought I'd be taking on the throne. I don't think there's any chance of that soon.
But he was also full of praise for his mother's long service record.
She's a staunch old trout, isn't she? And she's certainly done her job. I mean, she does 361 functions a year. I mean, in some ways I'm glad I don't have to do that job.
Te Aroha's celebration of the Queen's 90th birthday, with its royal lookalikes, was the brainchild of staunch royalists Angela and Bill Thompson. Bill says they love the history of the royal family and were delighted with how the town got into the spirit of the occasion.
Oh, it's gone really well. It was just nice to dress up, and I think the people in the town all got into the way it went. I think it was really successful.
Te Aroha woman Tria Trafford says she turned out for the festivities because she's a true royalist.
I love the royal family, especially the Queen. She's done such a wonderful job all her years. She was a queen for, when she was so young, and she's carried it right through, and now she's 90. It's amazing.
93-year-old Catherine Stewart says she's followed the Queen's life since they were both children. She says the young Elizabeth was an inspiration when, as a princess, she drove trucks during the war.
I think she's a wonderful woman, and I think we've got a lot to learn from her in some of the things she does.
After the procession, the royal guests retired to the Thompsons' house for tea and birthday cake. The couple's villa, which is filled with royal and historical memorabilia, was today officially opened as a museum by Matamata Piako Mayor Jan Barnes. She says the town's support of the monarchy is helping put Te Aroha on the map.
It's a point of difference, and it brings people to our town. I mean, we have the fabulous Hauraki rail trail that comes through Te Aroha here. We have a lot of industry, and people arrive from Auckland and they say we didn't know it even existed.
The Thompsons Museum will now be open to groups by appointment. Funds raised from today's birthday celebration will go to Te Aroha's Riding for the Disabled. In Te Aroha for Checkpoint, Joe O'Brien.
Thank you very much, Joe. We're a bit unsure about the description of the Queen as a staunch old trout. Certainly if you'd said that about Queen Elizabeth I, it would have been off with your head. Anyway, in a sign of the times, the Queen is advertising for someone to manage her Twitter and Facebook presence. The full-time role of Head of Digital Engagement at Buckingham Palace will involve managing the monarch's social media accounts, which already have millions of followers, as well as finding new ways to engage with and appeal to a worldwide audience. I think more visits to Te Aroha would help. The advertising suggests a successful applicant will have experience managing and editing high-profile websites and social media accounts and will know what to share and when to keep quiet. The successful candidate will earn £50,000 a year. That's a salary of 102,000 New Zealand dollars. If you're interested in applying, applications close on Monday, shortly before 11 o'clock in the morning, New Zealand time. Coming up, tenants may sleep a little easier tonight after a court ruled landlords are liable for any accidental damage in a home. The Christchurch City Council says goodbye to freedom campers, at least until the end of next summer. The Australian 60 Minutes crew, of course, got themselves into big trouble. They're due to arrive back home tonight after spending the past 2 weeks behind bars in a Beirut jail. And Chernobyl, 3 decades on. What is it like there now? All of that and more coming up. But first, and business with Sharon. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
The Papakura MP and Cabinet Minister Judith Collins says councils around the country should be following the lead of Auckland and cracking down on unregistered dogs. The Auckland Council today announced an amnesty for owners of unregistered dogs that are classified as menacing, allowing them to register them for free until June the 30th. After that, council officers will launch a region-wide blitz impounding any remaining unregistered animals and fining their owners. The insurance company at the centre of a dispute over whether landlords and their insurers or tenants are liable for accidental damage says it's now a matter for Parliament to sort out. The Court of Appeal has ruled against AMI Insurance after it tried to force the tenants, Kenji and Tieko Osaki, to pay a $216,000 repair bill when a house it insured burnt down. The fire was caused by a pot of oil unattended on the stove. The jury considering verdicts for Leonard Natras Berquist and Bowen Wallace Loretz has retired for the night. The teenagers are accused of murdering Ihaya Gilman Harris in Auckland in December 2014 when they were 17. The company contracted to look after the stormwater network in Dunedin says it warned the council about the poor condition of the infrastructure 4 months before the city's damaging flood last year. Just over 1,200 properties were flooded when 2 months' worth of rain fell in South Dunedin in 24 hours in June last year. Government agency call centres are being targeted by international scammers who want to get money out of staff. The Internal Affairs Department says operators are on guard after numerous calls from cyber criminals wanting information about co-workers. And a fatal crash has closed State Highway 1 in mid-Canterbury. The road is closed near Chertsey with diversions in place. I'll be back at 6 with more news, sport and weather. The time right now, and I'm going to tell you properly, it is now almost 24 minutes to 6. I have a round clock in the studio now, so I can
it's
tell
good,
the
isn't
time.
it? We've got analogue and digital in here.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
Brilliant.
RNZ splashing out. Vernon Small put in an OAA about that. How much did you spend on your clock? I think about $49. Thank you, Katrina.
Way less than that, I'd say.
Turning to business news now with Sharon Beck-Kelly. Welcome, Sharon.
Hello, John.
Tourism and migration hit new highs in March.
They did. I've got lots of numbers here for you. So we're talking about the number of people coming here to live or on holiday. Now, migration numbers, a record annual gain of 67,600. That is for the year to March. That's the 20th month in a row it's been at record levels.
Extraordinary.
I know, but if you just look at the month of March alone, net migration 5,300 compared with more than 6,000 in February. So the question is, has migration peaked? And economists are saying, well, it could be too soon to say.
Okay. And these are separate, so there's two numbers here. There's migration numbers and tourism numbers. Or are they the same thing? So they're not. So migrants are people who are coming here for good, right? Tourists are people who are coming
or long term.
Okay.
And then tourist numbers, 344,000 for the month of March, 3.26 million for the year. So that's another record. Wow. So that's good for the economy, of course, especially at a time when dairy prices are so low. We like the tourism numbers because they come here and spend lots of money. But of course, the question is, can the country cope with these numbers? And in summer, there was the big issue of freedom camping. And a lot of these small towns feeling like they were full to overflowing with these people coming.
In fact, we're going to talk about that in about 1 minute. Yeah, okay. Gosh, it's every time you come in, you talk about a record. I mean, there's just records in everything, isn't there?
It is.
Yeah. Extraordinary. Okay, what happened on the markets today?
On the markets, the top 50 index crept to a new record. That's the 9th record close in a row, 5 points up at 6,906, and the New Zealand dollar 69.71 US cents, 89.28 Australian.
Okay, thank you, Sharon Beck-Kelly. It's been wonderful having you on because this is the end of your week with us, isn't it?
It's the end of our week together.
Thanks, Sharon Beck-Kelly. It's been fantastic. Right. Sharon was talking about campers and tourists. Those wanting to freedom camp in Christchurch or Banks Peninsula next summer may have to think again. Well, they will have to think again. After introducing a bylaw that attempted to corral campers together at 5 spots, the council found they were overwhelmed and closed all 5. We looked at that on this program. Our Christchurch City Council Committee today recommended extending a temporary ban on those without a loo on board. That's campers without a loo on board until March next year. Here's our Christchurch local government reporter, Colin Young.
French Farm Bay bore the brunt of last summer's problems, including sewage in the harbour. Local Jan Cook, who spoke at today's council meeting, says the bylaw was never going to work.
We've spoken to a lot of people down in the bay. They're lovely young people. They want to do the right thing. But when you've got so many people concentrated with no facilities of their own, night after night, 100 people a night at French Farm, and they're washing their dishes, they're cooking, there's inevitably going to be problems and conflict with other users.
Akaroa resident Suki Thompson told the committee extending the temporary ban was a good start, but longer term she wanted to see an area-wide ban on camping without a toilet. She warned that anything less was courting disaster because campers would simply move to another site.
It could be right outside somebody's house, there could be any number of vans, and the council has given itself no ability to move those people on. It has actually given them a right to be there in unlimited numbers for an unlimited amount of time in any type of vehicle.
Suki Thompson went further and called for a ban on camper vans being able to even park in the streets of Akaroa.
You've got vehicles parked right in front, for example, of the historic Langaloa Tevano cottage. People can't even see that beautiful building from the street. They don't even know there's a museum behind there. Here's the vans parked in front of our old people's residences, completely blocking their views.
Councillor Ali Jones questioned whether the current bylaw could be made to work and whether providing more toilets would make any difference.
In some of these areas, there are free facilities available, but a number of freedom campers, excuse me for being so graphic, will basically open the door and crap outside the car instead of actually walking across the car park to a free toilet.
Councillor Andrew Turner, who represents Banks Peninsula ratepayers, also backs an area-wide ban on those without a loo on board. He says even since the 5 freedom camping spots were closed down in March, campers have started turning up on other parts of the peninsula.
There are freedom campers on the foreshore at Little Akaloa, despite there's a community camping ground in Little Akaloa. That again is something that could easily escalate. And of course, right by the beach is exactly where anybody would choose to be. You've got the $1 million views and you've got the amazing location there, but you're also camping directly in front of privately owned batches.
Today's recommendation from the Council Committee will be voted on by the full Council in May. In Christchurch, Fitchik Point, Conan Young.
We're just going to head a bit south from Christchurch to Dunedin again. We asked for feedback from people and we're getting lots of it. We're going to run through some of it now. John, the council knew of the issues. It's simply called deferred maintenance, says Paul. John, stormwater. Obviously local politicians do not have enough political capital to justify any significant spending on infrastructure investment. Too bad that's their job under the Local Government Act. Their incentives are all wrong, says Michael. Yeah, that's a good point. Lots of people are pointing out, of course, local body elections this year. They'll be fascinating in Dunedin, possibly in the context of this report and the work that needs to be done and therefore the money that needs to be spent. Terry says, I think the insurance company should contribute to the cost of these sort of infrastructure upgrades to help reduce their liabilities and claim back the cost from central government by way of a tax deduction. After all, the insurance company has agreed to carry the risk at the cost of the insured, so why should the insured contribute to reducing the insurance company's liabilities as well? Sorry, Terry, I read that appallingly, but I think that's a fascinating point. We might go back to the Insurance Council on that. One email about or text about a pumping station in Dunedin that raises a really good and very specific question that we are going to ask. Thank you. And this one here from Russell Bell, who was a former associate lecturer in risk management studies at Massey University, and he says Ms Stokes should resign. She clearly would not achieve risk management 101. Thank you all for your feedback, particularly those of you in Dunedin. But it's wonderful to hear from you all. The Australian 60 Minutes crew, it's a current affairs television program, of course, who were jailed in Lebanon, are on their way back to Australia, but the mother they followed is still in Beirut, despite also being released. Sally Faulkner and 4 television crew members travelled to Lebanon in an attempt to get back her 2 children from their father. Channel 9 has announced a full review of the events that led to the arrest of their 60 Minutes crew. Questions are now being asked about what deals were struck to allow their release and why the story was allowed to go ahead in the first place. The ABC's, that's public broadcasting as opposed to commercial Channel 9, in this case it's Lucy Carter reporting.
There were smiles on the faces of the 60 Minutes crew and Brisbane mother Sally Faulkner as they were released from custody. Even the children's father and Miss Faulkner's estranged husband, Ali Alamein, has told Macquarie Radio he's just pleased it's over.
I wouldn't say I won the result. I don't think anyone is a winner, and I don't think anyone is a loser.
Legal sources have told the ABC the release was arranged after Channel 9 agreed to pay Mr Alamein compensation, believed to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's understood Miss Faulkner has also agreed to drop all custody claims. However, Ali Alamein denies he was paid a cent.
No, that's not true, because I haven't received anything and I haven't signed on any checks. I've heard I got about 10 million from one TV station. I was like, really? Wow. I haven't gotten anything. I got what was supposedly is Sal signing off on the custody of the kids. That's worth more than anything to me.
The Federal Treasurer, Scott Morrison, was grilled about this supposed payment this morning by Channel 7 Sunrise presenter David Koch.
Channel 9's a publicly listed company. You run the Australian Securities and Investment Commission. That comes under your portfolio. If a bribe was paid, should ASIC be investigating Channel 9?
Well, David, you're making a lot of assumptions about a number of facts there, and I'm not going to do that this morning. I think what today we're pleased about is Ms Faulkner's coming home, as are other Australians coming home.
David Koch persisted.
Channel 9's a publicly listed company that comes under that. If a bribe was paid or a kidnapping attempt paid for by a publicly listed company, should ASIC be investigating to get to the bottom of it?
David, I'm not going to respond to hypotheticals.
The full details of how the crew and Miss Faulkner were released may never be publicly revealed. However, Channel 9 has launched an internal inquiry into the matter. In a statement, Nine's Chief Executive Officer Hugh Marks says that
at no stage did anyone from 9 or 60 Minutes intend to act in any way that made them susceptible to charges that they breached the law or to become part of the story that is Sally's story. But we did become part of the story and we shouldn't have.
The review will be conducted by former 60 Minutes executive producer Gerald Stone, the former head of A Current Affair David Hurley, and the network's general counsel. The Channel 9 crew and Sally Faulkner have been freed. However, 4 people involved in this saga are still behind bars in Beirut. Adam Whittington, the leader of the so-called child recovery team, and 3 of his contractors weren't included in whatever deal was struck by 60 Minutes. Beirut lawyer Joe Karam, who is representing 2 of the men, says they feel let down.
I would have preferred that Channel 9 to push and include in their settlement the people they paid to help them in this process, in this plan. They came here based on instruction from Channel 9, who paid for their trip and, say, program or plan. My client believed that he was assisting a mother to help get back her children. She had a court order from Australia.
The team from Child Abduction Recovery International will face a judge later today.
Renters may sleep a little easier tonight after a court ruled that landlords are liable for any accidental damage in a home. AMI Insurance has lost its battle to force a couple to pay a $216,000 repair bill after a house it insured burned down when a pot of oil was left unattended on high heat. This is flip side, however. One property manager is warning the court ruling could push up rents and make landlords more, quote, fussy about who lives in their homes. Max Toll has the story.
In 2009, Tiko Osaki left a pot of oil on high heat unattended, and the house she was renting with her husband burned to the ground. Their landlord went to his insurance company, AMI, which then came back to the Osakis and told them to stump up $216,000 for the repairs. 7 years later, after going through the tenancy tribunal, a district court and the High Court, the Court of Appeal has ruled in the Osakis' favour. They don't have to pay. Instead, the court has set a legal precedent by saying landlords are responsible for any accidental damage. The executive officer of the Property Investors Association, Andrew King, says that could cause problems.
A lot of landlords may not want to have perhaps parents with children. They might not want to have students, people who they deem potentially to be a little bit more irresponsible. Insurance companies could want to know what type of tenant you have, and they'll apply an insurance premium that they deem to be appropriate. And ultimately, that'll push back onto the tenant.
Andrew King says it could have a psychological effect too.
It relieves tenants of all their responsibilities, and it could mean that they're just a bit more lacklustre around rental properties and not intentionally but accidentally cause more damage just through carelessness.
A similar accident happened in 1999. Glenn Shields was frying bacon at his student flat in Dunedin. He left the pan unattended, and in moments everything was ash. He and his 4 flatmates were then slapped with a $150,000 bill by the landlord's insurer. It's a situation the Insurance and Savings Ombudsman Karen Stevens says is common, until now. But she warns it doesn't mean tenants can go around kicking holes in the walls just for the fun of it.
Doesn't extend to indemnify the tenant if it's intentional damage, where you get into students, for instance, intentionally damaging a house, having a party and then throwing things out the window or breaking things. They're not going to be covered by this case.
The ruling also means landlords without insurance are still liable for any accidental damage. A housing advocate, Warren Smith, says it will have an initial shock value for landlords, but would ultimately be for the best.
It just reaffirms more prudent and proper management by ensuring that, there's proper smoke alarm detectors, and the best relationship between a landlord and tenant is where there's reasonable standards and mutual respect. We're not here talking about a tenancy that has been contaminated through methamphetamine.
AMI Insurance, now under IAG ownership, says it won't appeal the ruling. The insurer says it finds the decision difficult to reconcile, and it's now a matter for Parliament. It says it's still considering the ramifications for its policies and its customers. For Checkpoint, Max Toll.
Coming up to 10 to 6 on Checkpoint. Thank you for being with us. On the 26th of April 1986, 30 years ago next week, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant's number 4 reactor blew up, causing a catastrophic meltdown, spewing 400 times more radiation into the atmosphere than the Hiroshima bomb. 3 decades on, Chernobyl's soil, water and air remain among the most highly contaminated on Earth, and an exclusion zone remains in place. But as Nathan Frandino reports, some settlers have stayed put.
30 years may have passed, but Chernobyl is still a dangerous place to live. On April 26, 1986, a botched systems test sent clouds of nuclear material across Europe and sent radiation levels soaring. It was the worst nuclear meltdown in history. Video from the time showed a facility in ruins as rescue workers surveyed the damage. And now, as the 30th anniversary approaches, Greenpeace's Rashid Alimov says little has changed.
The radiation levels are high. Many areas are considered to be contaminated and are not acceptable for agriculture and other things.
Here in Russia's Bryansk region, the radiation has touched every aspect of people's lives. It is in the food they eat, in the milk and water they drink, on the children's playgrounds, and in the soil where their vegetables grow. Despite the contaminated food supply, residents say they have no choice but to eat it anyway.
What is the point of checking the radiation levels? Do you agree? We check them and they are beyond acceptable. What do we do then? Throw it away? We are hungry. Everybody wants to eat, our children and us.
The disaster affected some 745 settlements, including 26 in evacuation zones. One of the worst effects was the significant decline in health.
All of our bones ache. Everything. Arms, legs, even lifting hands is painful. At 70, merchants should be married. And us, we all have one foot in the grave.
Even as officials build a new steel-clad casement to block radiation, the surrounding zone, roughly the size of Luxembourg, is expected to remain largely uninhabitable.
30 years ago next week. Incredible. Now, if you're watching us online or Channel 50, these pictures have just come in from Reuters. It's a massive explosion which has rocked a major petrochemical facility of Mexican national oil company Pemex in the Gulf state of Veracruz. It's pumping a cloud of noxious chemicals into the sky. Pemex has confirmed that 3 of its workers have died. Another 136 are injured. Local emergency officials said hundreds of people have been evacuated from the site. The footage we're seeing, obviously if you're listening, it shows an initial burst of flames followed by a tower of thick smoke. What caused the blast was unclear, but Pemex initially warned local residents to keep away from the site due to what it described as a cloud of toxic fumes. It's breaking news just coming in from Mexico. Pemex is their national oil company. Search teams in Ecuador have turned their efforts to clearing bodies instead of finding survivors now, 5 days after the country was hit by a deadly earthquake which has claimed 440 lives. Gosh, that death toll keeps climbing. Yiming Wu from Reuters reports.
In Pedernales, rescue workers are doing a final sweep with their dogs to check for trapped survivors.
The town on the coast of Ecuador bore the brunt of Saturday's earthquake that killed more than 500 people. The death toll is expected to rise further. Ecuador's President, Rafael Correa, says the priority now is to clear the dead bodies.
There are critical hours during which there is hope of life. But on the other hand, there are dead bodies in the rubble beginning to decompose. So we must deal with those bodies and worry more about that than the remote possibility that someone is still alive.
The quake was the country's worst in decades and is likely to hit its struggling economy. Korea has said Ecuador will take years and billions of dollars to rebuild.
That report in from Ecuador, Reuters, our colleagues at Reuters. Heading home again, the Stars were in alliance for a group of Navy students preparing for their celestial navigation training. The students were due to conduct their training on HMNZS Wellington when it got called to Fiji in the wake of Cyclone Winston last month. The Navy did great work up there. Thanks to a smart remark and a quick-thinking teacher, they didn't miss out on their celestial navigation training. Our Defence reporter Kate Pereira-Garcia explains.
The officer students at the Devonport base are training to be bridge watchkeepers on the Navy's warships. Part of that training involves them being able to navigate by the stars. A planned trip on board HMNZS Wellington to Raoul Island was disrupted when the offshore patrol vessel was sent to Fiji to help provide humanitarian relief following Cyclone Winston. But their teacher, Senior Navigation Instructor Commander David Hedgley, found a solution.
I'm actually planning with my wife to go on a cruise in mid-June, and I was talking to the guys about this in the class, and one of the students said, well, perhaps they ought to go on a cruise to Fiji as part of the astro training. It was probably seen as a glib, amusing comment in the classroom, but it sowed a seed for me, and I thought, actually, this is a way that we can do it.
On the 28th of March, Commander Hedgley and 9 students boarded the Pacific Pearl, bound for Fiji. The students spent 7 of their 8 nights on board taking measurements. Each morning at 9, they compared their data to the ship's.
They were using GPS and electronic means. We were using the sextant, and we found that we were within 1/5 of a knot of speed and about 1/2 a degree of course. So I think it proved the accuracy of an old system and certainly gave every single one of the students a confidence.
The Pearl's captain and navigator were impressed. Sub-Lieutenant Sanjay Prakash was one of the students and says being on a cruise ship was a little bit different to a Navy vessel.
We still put the work in to really hone the skills of celestial navigation. So it was a little bit different. We didn't have a lot of our kind of peripheral responsibilities that we would have had if we were on a naval vessel. The Defence Force in general, but the Navy as well, is actually really good just for getting opportunities like that for travel, and I was actually quite impressed that the organisation was kind of agile enough to actually make the decision.
The spokesperson for P&O, David Jones, says the passengers were enthralled.
The crew loved it as well because bearing in mind that these are seafarers when it's all said and done, and the deck officers on board cruise ships generally have also done similar training in navigating by the stars using what might appear to be an antique instrument. In the seafaring community, there's a very strong regard for the heritage of seafaring.
Mr Jones hopes a similar cooperation can happen again, but while it was a cost-effective short-term solution for the Navy, Commodore Hedgley says it prefers to use its own resources. The next celestial navigation training is scheduled on HMNZS Otago later this year. For Checkpoint, Kate Pereira-Garcia.
Celestial navigation, lovely. An LA high school has opened the first gender-neutral bathroom after students collected more than 700 signatures calling for change. The campaign comes amidst a nationwide debate over laws in the state of North Carolina that force transgender people to use a bathroom matching the gender on their birth certificate.
It was a long time coming, but students in this Los Angeles high school have successfully petitioned to open what they say is the state's first gender-neutral restroom. Students in the Sante Education Complex's Gay Straight Alliance helped convert a girls' restroom into a restroom open to all students regardless of their gender identity. GSA group members say they started the It's Just a Toilet campaign to help not just transgender students, but the entire student body.
One of the spaces where students would say they oftentimes either get bullied or feel uncomfortable, it was in the restrooms. Sometimes on campus, usually off campus, students talked about having stories about how at times they would have to hold hold it and not go to the restroom all day long, and that was unhealthy for them.
So this restroom is important so all students could feel comfortable, not just LGBT students or not just minority students. It's for all students.
Their campaign comes amidst a nationwide debate over laws in North Carolina and elsewhere that bar transgender people from using public bathrooms consistent with their gender identity. The laws have touched off widespread criticism from corporate, entertainment, and sports leaders. Rock group Pearl Jam is the latest to cancel a show in the state in protest. But here in this downtown LA school, a step towards equality as students close the door on gender discrimination.
Coming up to the 6 o'clock news, more feedback from Dunedin. This from Jeff. We've had almost a year since the Dunedin floods, during which time our Mayor, Dave Cowell, has consistently maintained it was all due to global rising of ocean levels. What's amazing about his belief is that two very experienced experts in drainage, former Dunedin City Council drainage head Bruce Hendry and master engineer Neil Johnston, each with over 30 years of drainage expertise, pointed the finger of blame firmly at the council's door. Mayor Cowell has recently had his CEO, Susie Bidrose, write a complete rebuttal of Johnston's detailed report. This is now clearly all wrong in an effort to deflect blame and legal liability for flood damage. Mayor Cowell is now furious and blames other staff for wrong information. The October elections can't come soon enough for Dunedin. We have tried to get hold of Mayor Cowell today, but he's in the Chatham Islands. Coming up to 6 o'clock. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Great to have you with us. It's 6 o'clock, half an hour to go on that program, during which time animal shelters on the clampdown on dangerous Auckland dogs, how businesses can make it big in China. This is, of course, what everyone is after. And could London and New York be in line for a Bledisloe Cup test? For those of you who don't like rugby, that's when the All Blacks play Australia. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The insurance company at the centre of a dispute over whether landlords and their insurers or tenants are liable for accidental damage says it's now a matter for Parliament to sort out. The Court of Appeal has ruled against AMI Insurance after it tried to force tenants Kenji and Tieko Osaki to pay a $216,000 repair bill when a house it insured burnt down. Max Toll reports.
A district court, the High Court and now the Court of Appeal ruled the Osakis are not liable. AMI, now under the ownership of IAG Insurance, says it must accept the court's decision, but argues the Tenancies Act says the opposite. It says it's now a matter for Parliament to address and is still considering the significance for the company and its customers of the appeal court ruling. The executive officer of the Property Investors Association, Andrew King, says insurance companies may now push up premiums for landlords, which would affect rental prices. This is Max Toll.
Animal control officers are hoping an amnesty for unregistered menacing dogs in Auckland will help cut down the number of dog attacks they're called to. The Auckland Council says that until June the 30th, owners can register their animals for free. After that, officers will begin a region-wide crackdown, seizing any remaining unregistered dogs and finding their owners. The head of animal management, Jeff Keeber, says he hopes the amnesty might help address a rise in the number of attacks his staff are seeing.
The majority of offences that we detect, my officers detect, of an aggressive nature, yes, are caused by unregistered dogs. So there is an implicit relationship between people registering their dogs and being good dog owners.
Jeff Keeber says his staff will be out in force once the amnesty ends on July the 1st. The company contracted to look after the stormwater network in Dunedin says it warned the council about the poor conditions of the infrastructure 4 months before the city's damaging flood last year. An investigation found many of the drainage tanks in South Dunedin were blocked, and last month the council discovered 75% weren't working. May Heron has more.
Just over 1,200 South Dunedin properties were flooded when the equivalent of 2 months' rain fell in 24 hours last June. Fulton Hogan says it warned the council that because of the age and historic nature of the stormwater network, including the mud tanks, effective maintenance was a challenge. However, the company says it's confident it met all the requirements of its contract. The Insurance Council says ageing stormwater infrastructure and more severe storms mean insurance premiums will rise. It says some low-lying areas may have flooding completely excluded from their policies.
May Heron reporting. An Auckland jury deciding whether two teenagers are guilty of killing a much older man in a planned attack has retired for the night. Leonard Natras-Berquist and Bowen Wallace-Loretz have denied murdering Ihia Gilman-Harris in an Epsom motel room just after Christmas in 2014. Summing up the case in the High Court in Auckland, Justice Toogood told the jurors they have to weigh up the evidence that's been given about the injuries the victim received.
Yes, Mr Gilman-Harris may have fallen. That would not surprise anyone. If he was struck on the head, as described by Mr Natras-Berquist, it wouldn't surprise you if a big man, fell heavily against the coffee table and suffered bruising. But the Crown says, well, you've got other bruising. You've got those severe bruises on his legs.
Justice Toogood said the Crown also points to Mr Gilman-Harris having more than one skull fracture. The jury will resume its deliberations in the morning. The Canadian government is to make good on one of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's campaign pledges and introduce legislation that could lead to the legalisation of marijuana. The government says it will work with police to control who the drug is sold to, when it's sold and how it's used. The Conservative opposition says legalising marijuana would have a negative effect on young people. However, Canada's Health Minister, Jane Philpott, says the policy change would make them safer.
We will be introducing legislation in the spring of 2017 that ensures that we keep marijuana out of the hands of children and profits out of the hands of criminals. While this plan challenges the status quo in many countries, we are convinced it is the best way to protect our youth while enhancing public safety.
Jane Philpott, Canada's Health Minister. Volkswagen and United States authorities are reported to have reached a deal under which the car maker will offer to buy back almost 500,000 diesel vehicles that used sophisticated software to cheat emissions tests. To avoid a major court case, the German automaker is expected to tell a federal judge in San Francisco it's agreed to buy back 2-litre diesel vehicles sold in the US. Two sources briefed on the matter have also told the Reuters news agency VW owners selling back their vehicles would get a cash payment on top of receiving the estimated value of their vehicles before the emissions scandal became public last September. The 2-litre diesel vehicles involved would include versions of the Jetta sedan, the Golf Compact and the Audi A3. The sources say the buyback offer does not apply to the bigger 3-litre diesel vehicles also found to have exceeded US pollution limits, including Audi and Porsche SUV models. To sport, and one of New Zealand's leading Olympic equestrian hopes, Tim Price, has had to withdraw his 13-year-old horse Wesco from the Rio Games. Price had already withdrawn Wesco from the upcoming Kentucky International event, but the soft tissue injury is worse than initially thought. Equestrian New Zealand's High Performance Director, Sarah Dalziel, says it's a big blow.
Major setback for Tim, obviously, in terms of his number one horse being out, but, we have got a number of other horses and riders. We've got 6 riders in the high performance squad, the majority of them with multiple horses, and Tim himself has 2 other horses that are strong contenders, and he's competing them at both Badminton and Kentucky in the next month.
The equestrian team for Rio will be named at the end of June. The Warriors and former All Blacks doctor John Mayhew is out of an induced coma and talking to family. The 61-year-old was admitted to hospital in Auckland on Tuesday after a heart attack. That's the news.
Hi, this is Paul Brennan in for Brian Crump on Nights, and tonight Larry Stillman on the mobile phone technology offering real-time support to Bangladeshi women. Why? We'll find out. In our Nights Culture feature, Poetry Talk with Cliff Fell, who will join us to talk about the Nelson poet Rachel Bush. There's science in our changing world, and there's music in the pocket edition of Music 101. Join me after 7 tonight on Nights, RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Mostly sunny, however, a few showers, especially in Coromandel and Northland. Gisborne, a few showers becoming confined to the ranges tomorrow and sunny spells increasing. Hawke's Bay and Waitarapa fine. From Waikato to Wellington, including the Central High Country, also Bulla, Nelson and the Marlborough Sounds. Mostly sunny, however, a few showers tomorrow, mainly from Taranaki southwards. For the remainder of Marlborough, also Canterbury, sunny weather. Otago and Southland fine with high cloud, rain developing about the south coast tonight, patchy falls elsewhere tomorrow evening. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine, rain developing in Fiordland this evening, rain becoming persistent in Fiordland tomorrow morning and spreading to southern Westland later with a few showers elsewhere. Rain becoming heavy in Fiordland tomorrow evening. The Chatham Islands mostly sunny. It's 6:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Earlier this evening we talked about the Auckland Council's clampdown on menacing dogs. Under the new system, owners can register their so-called menacing dogs for free until the end of June, and for $25 their dog can also be desexed, microchipped and get a muzzle. But after that period ends, the council will seize any unregistered aggressive dogs and take them to animal shelters. The manager of one of those shelters, Zareen Gerbich, spoke to our reporter Alex Ashton.
Please stand on the mat when you come in, because this has actually got a disinfectant in it which will take any germs that are on your shoes off.
This is the Manukau Animal Shelter in South Auckland. The dogs we're about to see have been taken from neglectful homes or pulled off the street.
The dogs will have been picked up for either that they've attacked something, they have been aggressive, and we don't know who the owners are, or that the dogs have been out straying, or they have been removed from a property because they're unregistered.
Many of them are deemed menacing dogs. Most have signs on the front of their cage reading "fighter."
We would have the largest percentage of menacing type dogs in New Zealand come through this shelter. At the moment I might have somewhere in the vicinity of 100 odd dogs. Of those there would be at least 80 that would fit the criteria.
Dogs like those, menacing dogs, are the target of the Auckland Council's new crackdown on dangerous dogs, spurred on by a series of attacks, including one on a 7-year-old South Auckland boy. Jeff Keeber oversees animal control in Auckland. He says of the 3,000 dogs taken into the shelter this year, only 600 were registered, about 1 in 5. Mr. Keeber hopes the offer of free registration will change that and help stop all too common dog attacks, 80% of which are on children from dogs they know well.
We come along, pick up their dog, impound it, it might get euthanised. 3 months later they've got another dog that's caused more problems. We're back on the property, which is a big risk for us because we obviously wouldn't be welcome in that circumstance again. So it's a cycle that we want to break.
Jeff Keeber says some dogs can never be rehomed. He stresses, though, that the shelter isn't just death row for dogs.
Some dogs that get impounded here by nature of their temperament, and you can see some of these here, they've got fighter, and this one here needs a catch pole on it. So some of those we're not going to be able to adopt, but the important and key fact here is that the shelter staff are so dedicated to getting these dogs new homes that 100% of all dogs that are adoptable do find a new forever home.
After 28 years working in dog shelters, Zareen's seen hundreds of dogs rehomed and hundreds more have to be put down.
It doesn't make me angry anymore. There are different reasons for that happening. I believe that people need to think at the beginning, can they afford to have this dog within their family? And I think they're not answering those questions honestly enough to themselves.
The tighter rules on dog owners are likely to bump up the numbers in shelters like Manukau, which is already 90% full. But Zareen Gerbich says they're prepared to handle an increase, and there are other shelters around to house any extra dogs. For Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
A Wairarapa-based wine and agribusiness company is leading the way for New Zealand businesses in China by setting up an international trade centre there. Murdoch James Estate has teamed up with a Chinese partner to develop a hub in Xi'an to help businesses enter the market in China. Our political reporter Demelza Leslie, who's with the Prime Minister and a 40-strong New Zealand trade delegation in China, filed this report from Xi'an.
Murdoch James has been successfully exporting wine, wood products, meat and cherries to China for the past 5 years. It has set up a commercial retail complex and logistics park to help others do the same. The company's chief executive, Roger Fraser, says he's been lucky in that his business partner has very strong contacts in China, but he says it's not so easy for others.
It's quite lucky to get an introduction in this market. A lot of people have to work very hard to get a foot in the door, And we actually have both. We have the relationship which we've established through our partners, but we also have business that we're doing in Shanghai standalone.
In the new hub called ZN Centre, businesses can sell their products through its retail shops or set up temporary offices for free. Mr Fraser says they'll also help coordinate imports and sales.
So if they think we'd be a good partner, we can do their logistics for them, their importing, their customs clearance, appointments, contacts, paperwork, all that sort of stuff. All the stuff we've learnt to do over the last 5 years, from both sides actually. Us in New Zealand shipping here and our Chinese colleagues clearing customs here. We've all learnt a lot about how to bring goods in without too much pain.
Mojo Coffee from Wellington is the first business to set up in the centre. The founder, Steve Gianetsis, says he would not have considered China if it wasn't for the centre's help.
So, I mean, they're our partners, so they just basically, whatever we need, they just provide it.
Do you think without them you would have been able to set up the business?
No, I wouldn't even bothered.
The Trade Minister, Todd McClay, says China is a hard place to do business if you don't know people or the language.
It's very easy to want to export from New Zealand to China, but to be successful can be a challenge. And I often say to businesses in New Zealand, if you're finding it hard to do your business in New Zealand, what makes you think it'll be easier overseas?
Mr McClay says the establishment of the ZN Centre and calls from the online site Alibaba for more New Zealand products are crucial in helping New Zealand businesses sell their products to China's 1.4 billion consumers.
That was RNZ's political reporter Demelza Leslie reporting from China. Fascinating issue, getting access to China and the quid pro quos required, extradition deals, South China Sea, and how much you say. We're hoping to talk to the Prime Minister about this balancing act when he gets back. As you heard in the news, Volkswagen and US officials have reached a framework deal to buy back some 500,000 vehicles that use sophisticated software to evade US emission rules. But Japanese car giant Mitsubishi Motors says it too used improper fuel economy testing methods to make emission levels appear favourable. As Haley Platt from Reuters reports, the emission sent its shares down 15% on Wednesday, wiping $1.2 billion from Mitsubishi's market value.
A déjà vu moment, another emissions confession and another apology. This time it's Mitsubishi Motors, Japan's sixth largest automaker by market value.
We have discovered that improper tests were used to make fuel consumption look better than it actually was. The testing methods weren't in line with Japanese regulations either. We offer our profound apologies to all our customers and stakeholders.
Mitsubishi says 625,000 vehicles produced since mid-2015 were manipulated. They included its EK Mini Wagon and 468,000 similar models made for Nissan Motors.
It's a fairly sizable number, but it would appear nothing like the scale of Volkswagen as yet. But clearly it is going to be an obvious headwind for the company, and accordingly we've seen the equity market marking down their share price very dramatically.
The 15% drop was the biggest one-day fall in 12 years, and it wiped $1.2 billion off its market value.
It is a relatively small player in the global market infrastructure, but of course it is a smaller component part of a bigger group. So I guess that's going to be the other variable at play.
It's not the first scandal Mitsubishi Motors has been involved in. In 2000, it covered up safety records and customer complaints. And 4 years later, it admitted to broader problems going back decades. The timing of this confession isn't ideal either. Mitsubishi recently revised down its earnings outlook because of the global slowdown. It will now stop making and selling the models and has set up an independent panel to investigate the problems.
The BBC reported that 2 hours into the trading day in Japan, Mitsubishi Motors shares were not able to trade as there were about 10 times as many sell orders as there were bids. That would seriously drive the price down. Mitsubishi says it's unlikely cars in New Zealand have been caught up in the fuel efficiency botch-up. A Mitsubishi New Zealand spokesman says initial investigations show only cars sold in Japan have been affected. He says it's unlikely the cars were imported into the country because the engine is too small and isn't suitable for New Zealand roads. We will try and get absolute confirmation on that issue. It's 6 on Checkpoint. Aftershocks, some as big as 6.1, continue to rock Japan a week after a series of strong earthquakes killed 48 people. More than 100,000 people are still living in evacuation centres or in their cars as rescuers continue their search among the rubble for survivors. Here's Gillian Kitchener.
Toshitsugu Maeda is looking for his father, although he knows that with each passing day, the chances diminish of finding him alive. The death toll after last week's powerful earthquakes in southern Japan stands at nearly 50. But Maeda is holding on to hope that someone will spot his missing father. He says he just wants to tell him, when he is found, that it must have been a painful wait. But he's not the only one suffering. Officials say around 1,000 people have been injured and tens of thousands are living in evacuation centers, in tents, or in their cars. Aid is trickling in. Store shelves are being replenished, but life is far from back to normal. Residents are still afraid to return to their battered homes, and officials are warning of more aftershocks in southern Japan for at least another week.
That report from Reuters. Heading home now, kind of, because home seems transportable at the moment, with sports news. And it seems that London and New York could be in line for a Bledisloe Cup test. Sports editor Stephen Hewson is joining us live from Wellington. Nice to have you with us, Stephen. Bledisloe Cup, that is the Wallabies playing the All Blacks. For people who aren't rugby followers, normally that takes place in usually Sydney or Auckland, but although they obviously go to Christchurch and Wellington and Dunedin. But why London or New York?
Well, what they've got with the Australia is that they're revamping Sydney's ANZ Stadium, and that obviously, as you mentioned there, hosts the tests, and that sort of puts things on the move for Australian rugby. It's going to be a sort of a several-year project, which puts things out of action for a bit. Although, in saying that, this possibility of this test moving around the globe wouldn't be until 2020, because just the way the calendar's made up. That it wouldn't be until 2020 that Australia gets to host a couple of, or two Bledisloe Cup tests, which is usually a three-match series. 2019, you've got the Rugby World Cup again, and so I think there's only a one-off Bledisloe Cup test in that year.
This is interesting. So, this sort of the All Blacks involved in proselytising missions. So, for example, we're playing Ireland and Chicago, aren't we? At the end of this year in November, I think.
Proselytising or increasing the brand. I think is the marketing.
Yeah, and also their sponsor is American-based, so they're obviously getting bang for their buck there. But I can't. What's the point of playing a Bledisloe Cup in London? They like rugby in England. Why would they do that?
Well, there's obviously the huge expat market there. You'd sell out Twickenham. They make a whole lot more money than what they would if they were staging them either in New Zealand or Australia. I mean, you're talking, what, about 85,000?
Yeah, okay, fair point. And the tickets aren't cheap, are they, at Twickenham?
No, that's right. They'd sell out Twickenham, no problem, you'd imagine. There'd be plenty of Australians and New Zealanders that would be keen to have a look, and you'd most probably pick up a few locals too, keen to have a look at a Bledisloe Cup match. So it's certainly financially, it would be a lucrative deal. I mean, the New Zealand Rugby Union says that it hasn't actually received a request or spoken with the Australian Rugby Union about it at all, but they're certainly not ruling it out. They say that it's got to fit in with their strategy, I suppose, about taking their brand global. I mean, but dollars always talk in these things, don't they? So I imagine financially it certainly would be something that they're quite willing to consider.
Yeah, because the Bledisloe Cups, I don't know, I'm being a bit mean here, and I apologise to our Australian listeners, because there are a few expat Australians in New Zealand now, but they're not what they were as encounters, are they? Although I was in Sydney last year when the All Blacks actually lost to Australia, and there were lots of excited Aussies, but boy, the All Blacks have had the wood over them for quite a while now.
Well, they certainly have. I think it's still got a bit of that. Well, I suppose the big brother, little brother rivalry going on. I mean, it's the reverse of the cricket, I suppose, isn't it? Really, you know, the Australians most probably sit there and think the same thing about when they come to play the Black Caps cricket-wise. But I think there's still a bit of interest, and they certainly seem to sell well when they're playing here in New Zealand.
Let's talk about Lydia Ko in San Francisco. She's remarkable, this young woman, isn't she?
Well, she wasn't quite so remarkable last time out, was she? I mean, it was the first time, I think, in the tournament this year that she failed to finish in the top 20 after she, of course, had that big win in the majors. So maybe she had a little bit of a hangover from winning that major. But yeah, she's into the swinging skirts tournament, which it's called in San Francisco. That she tees off about 2 a.m. tomorrow morning, and she's chasing a third straight title at this tournament. It was, of course, the first tournament that she won as a professional golfer, so it carries something special for her. So special, in fact, that she's actually got the date of that first professional win tattooed on her wrist.
Yeah, that's cool. I see there's a bit of controversy has arisen about Lydia Ko in the lead up to the tournament. Julie Inkster, who's a legend, of course, on the LPGA Tour, has had a dig at Golf Digest for not putting her on their cover. Is that right, Stephen?
Yeah, well, I think they've had, 3 women on the cover of Golf Digest. Michelle Wee was one of them. They've also had a couple of Ashoa, who was a well-known golfer, and I think the latest one that they've got on there on there is Spiranak. Now, she's not actually a LPGA player, but she's a well-known sort of former university golfer in the States, and Inkster has come out and said that why don't you actually put a golfer on there about golf, because it's basically, she said, it's sort of sex sells type thing. They've got Spiranak there in a sort of futuristic type outfit with a golf club, and Inkster's come out and said, well, obviously sex sells, and I understand why the magazine's doing it, but if you're actually talking about golf and talent, Lydia Ko should be on there. Yeah, poor form. And I look forward to them providing a copy of the last time a man was scantily clad on the cover of that magazine, a male golfer. Poor form. Well, that's certainly, that's not an image that...
No, well, that's a profound double standard. Now, John Mayhew is out of the coma, and that's great news, isn't it, Dr. John Mayhew?
Indeed, he is. He's been talking to family. He's still obviously in hospital, but he's up and talking to family. They've put out a statement today to sort of, I suppose, put people's minds at rest that he is recovering from the heart attack that he suffered on Tuesday. So that's good news for the Mayhew family, and that it seems like there won't be too severe repercussions from that heart attack for him. But yeah, good news for the Mayhew family. Yeah, really good news. A wonderful man, John Mayhew. Thanks, Stephen Houston, our sports editor. We appreciate it. India's government says 330 million people are affected by one of the country's worst droughts. 330 million as a heat wave moves across the country with diminishing water sources. Gillian Kitchener from Reuters has more.
India's heat wave has been particularly brutal in the south and east of the country. For 10 days, the region has endured temperatures of more than 40 degrees Celsius. And with relentless heat comes drought. People and livestock are parched and crops are dying. India's Water Resources Minister Uma Bharti is calling on the interlinking of rivers to solve the ongoing crisis.
We are not playing with the climate at all. It is only the surplus water. And total proper study will be done of the surplus flood monsoon water. And that water will be used for the interlinking and creation of new rivers.
But here in the southern city of Hyderabad, residents complain that the government is not doing enough. They say local water sources have nearly dried up, leaving the people and their farms without water. More than 300 million people across India are believed to be affected, and for most, there's little relief in sight. The heat wave is forecast to continue into next month.
That report from Reuters in India. Now, finally tonight, as we mentioned earlier, the Queen is advertising for someone to manage her Twitter and Facebook accounts. The position's based at Buckingham Palace, pays about 100 grand New Zealand, and no doubt will be worth thousands of Twitter followers. But Katie Nicholl beats all of that because she's royal correspondent for Britain's The Mail on Sunday and Vanity Fair. And Katie, are you on the phone?
Yeah, hi, I'm on the phone. I'm standing literally in front of Windsor Castle.
Well, thank you for joining us at very short notice. You're a good sport. The Queen, I've got my dates confused. It's the 21st. The Queen is turning 90 today, isn't she?
She is. She turns 90 today. It's a big day today, but it's actually quite unusual for her to celebrate her birthday on April the 21st. Usually, she waits a couple of months until the weather gets better because it's a little chilly today, and she celebrates her birthday in June. But because this is such a milestone, and such a special event. She's celebrating it twice. And I'm just looking out the window of a very lovely hotel where a very sweet lady's just bought me a latte, and I can see people gathering, balloons, big 90 balloons flying in the sky. She's not going to be here for quite a few hours, but the fact that there are already, 50 or 60 people out here waiting to catch a glimpse of her, I think just shows you the huge interest and affection for the Queen, and people have really got behind this birthday. They're very excited about it.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because whatever you think of the monarchy, and in our part of the world, there's sometimes from time to time sort of shuffling around about when and if we become a republic. But boy, yes, she has endured, hasn't she? If you think of the world she became queen in, no paparazzi, absolutely, no internet, none of that stuff, and the world she remains queen in, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
Well, I think the wonderful thing that she gives us is that continuity and that stability, and she's seen wars and crises within her own family, prime ministers, presidents, other kings and queens come and go, and yet she's stood there as that constant, and she is absolutely incredible. And I think you're quite right, whether you're a Republican or a monarchist, you have to respect and admire the work that this woman has put into a job that was never meant to be her job in the first place. This was an accident of birth.
Yeah, a tough old accident of birth, isn't it? And speaking of accidents of birth, and obviously Charles wasn't one, he was planned and wanted and loved and all that stuff, but he is the heir. How is he going? How is that extraordinary public waiting game, the oddest waiting game really I can think of, playing out for him?
Well, it is the longest waiting game. He is the longest serving Prince of Wales. He's 68 later this year. There's a documentary that's going out tonight that Charles has been very heavily involved with on BBC called The Queen at 90. I got a sneak preview last night, and I have to say he looks very happy. He looks very content doing what he's doing. Don't forget that while he's not king, he can do a huge amount of other things, and he's very actively involved in a whole number of issues. Those are the sort of things he won't be able to do when he's king. So I don't think he's unhappy where he is. Of course, he will have a clear strategy of what he wants to do when that time does come over. But the truth is, and what Prince William also said this in an interview, none of them really want to think about life without the Queen. And I bet you that if I go and speak to people standing outside now, they'll say exactly the same thing.
Katie Nicarua, correspondent for Vanity Fair and The Mail. On Sunday. Thank you so much, Katie. We really appreciate your time. We're going to end tonight with a letter from Linda Stewart, JP. I listened with interest. Yes, we can expect our premiums to rise if we live in low-lying areas. Christchurch is a special case. We had an earthquake storm here, and that caused a land slump from west to east. Because of those events, the coastal communities from Governor's Bay around to New Brighton are affected. I feel we need to have our weakened stop banks along the Avon and Heathcote rivers repaired, raised, and in many places built, because there isn't one to create a flood protection network, protection to give us breathing space while governments effect a policy. Thank you, Linda.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The insurance company at the centre of a dispute over whether landlords and their insurers or tenants are liable for accidental damage says it's now a matter for Parliament. Animal control officers hope an amnesty for unregistered menacing dogs in Auckland will lower the number of dog attacks. A contractor warned the Dunedin Council about the poor condition of the stormwater network 4 months before the June flood. And the jury in the Epsom motel killing retires for the night. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, a mass murderer wins a human rights case, a cover-up of the highest level in South Korea, and the European Commission takes Google to task. Those stories and more in World Watch PM.